Good afternoon, everybody. We'll get things started. I hope you can all hear me okay. My name is Patrick Hogan and I'm a senior sports scientist with STATSports. So I'd like to thank you so much for logging on and joining us today. It's fantastic to see so many people back again for this year's webinar series. So this year we are hosting the webinar series, our first event with FC Utrecht. So FC Utrecht have been using STATSports to monitor their athletes for many years, and they were in fact our first client in the Eredivisie. So we would like to thank them very much for their collaboration with us over the years, and I'm looking forward to hearing from some of their performance staff in the first presentation this afternoon. Just before I introduce our speakers, during the presentations, you will be able to ask questions of the speakers using the live chat. Then at the end of each presentation, I'll ask the speaker a selection of those questions. When you are typing the questions, if I could ask you to please include as much detail as you can. That way you can be sure that I'm conveying exactly what it is that you want to know to the speaker when I'm asking the question. At STATSports, we are privileged to have a network of clients around the globe in a variety of sports. And we are very proud to have so many top practitioners putting our Apex system to good use every day, monitoring their athletes. The aim of this webinar series is to provide a platform for performance staff to share some of the work that they're doing with you and hopefully provide you with some new ideas and approaches that you can apply to your own monitoring and analysis. If you haven't or if you aren't using the STATSports Apex system at the moment but want to learn more, please reach out and we can arrange an online demo for you. We have some excellent speakers, as I said, lined up for today's session. First up, we'll hear from Rainer van Gaal-Appelhoff and Thierry Bettenveld from FC Utrecht. After that, we'll have David Cosgrove. Up after David, then we'll have Peter Cachu, and finally, we'll have Maximilian Lankot. So looking forward to those presentations. Before I move on, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of the guys. It takes a lot of time to prepare and then to come on and deliver these presentations this afternoon. So we really do appreciate your efforts. But before we get started with that, I'm going to hand you over now to Jeroen Peters, so the performance manager at FC Utrecht, who's going to say a few words and then we'll start with the presentations.
Hi everyone, thanks Patrick for the kind words and the possibility to host this webinar in partnership with you guys. We are super excited to deliver you a 360 view on how we see optimal athlete preparation from our point of view at FC Utrecht, but also from top practitioners in the world. Dave, Max, Peter, thanks again for your cooperation and your energy and drive to deliver a fantastic presentations in the next 2 hours. I wish you all lots of wisdom pearls and enjoyment during this short, sharp and intensive webinar. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask them at the end of every presentation or contact us afterwards. Enjoy and speak soon.
Great stuff. Thanks, Jeroen. Okay, so we'll get started then straight away with the first presentations. So just a bit of background on Rainer and Thierry. So Rainer has been the lead sports scientist at FC Utrecht for the last 4 seasons. Along this journey, he's won the European playoffs in 2019, reached the domestic cup final in 2020, and is currently in the race for European playoffs once more with the team. So he holds an MSc in sports science from the University of Leuven, and he has also obtained his coaching degree, a UEFA A for elite youth. He's responsible for the day-to-day physical preparation of all first team players, as well as that, together with the head of performance, setting a performance culture while balancing athlete well-being throughout the club. So optimal planning of S&C, clear pitch-based training loads combined with a strong connection to the coaching staff are the cornerstones of his work. Thierry, meanwhile, has a master's in human movement sciences. His thesis investigated the use and importance of visual information in professional judo. So he spent a year as S&C at the Olympic Committee, working in a variety of sports like wheelchair basketball, volleyball and BMX. And moving to football then, he's now in his second season with FC Utrecht, working as an S&C coach and movement scientist for the squads from under 16 all the way up to the under 23s who are currently playing in a professional league. So I'll hand it over to you guys if you can go ahead and share your screen, and looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Yes, thank you, and Patrick, for the introduction. Just to make sure, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I can see it. All good.
Yeah, all good. So, okay, once more, thank you for the introduction. Wow, we're really thrilled to host this high-performance webinar together with you guys, especially during a time where online webinars have become the norm. I think it's a good opportunity to share ideas with each other. So, but before we kick off, we'd like to say that the both of us are part of a team of highly skilled people, and many of them had their inputs in the presentation upcoming. So let's kick off. All right, so at FC Utrecht, we play a significant role with youth development. So you actually see one of our players who went through a lot of academy teams before reaching to the first team. And this goes together with our goals we have as a club. So we want to have at least 8 homegrown players within the squad, of which 4 of them are in the starting 11. And this objective, we reach that almost weekly, on a weekly basis during the regular season. We want to reach for European playoffs, and we want to reach the European group stages. And a milestone during this season, against our match against Twente, we started the game with 4 homegrown players, and we ended it after a second half sub with 5 players. So aligning our goals with the performance department is of high interest to us. Then diving into the training process, the theoretical framework we use is the approach of monitoring external and internal load, like most other clubs are doing as well. We want to have a holistic data-driven framework to have the link between the training external load and the individual adaptive response. So without going into too much detail on this, the external load is the actual demand of training or competition, and the internal load is the actual response of the body of the athlete. So we're trying to monitor this using GPS from STATSports, but also heart rate monitoring and perceived efforts. And we do know that some individual characteristics are in place, some modifiable like the pre-training level, some non-modifiable like the age of the athlete. Ultimately, we have the fitness fatigue model, so the training outcome can either be positive or an increase in fitness, or negative, an accumulation of fatigue. And as we all know, the performance actually is the fitness minus the fatigue. So the overall aim for us as practitioners is to have an increase in fitness, taper towards competition to reduce the fatigue and get into an optimal performance state. Starting off with this picture, we see an athlete-centered approach, namely the players in the middle, which is ultimately what it's all about. We always have a high value on how the individual athlete copes with the external demands we place on them. And we do know that with the advances being made in wearable technology, like the GPS, we are able to quantify the underlying performance, but once more, highlighting that we want to understand how the human adapts to that. So we have an increasing priority on individualization within our training prescription and monitoring. And every second we get a huge amount of data, 260 plus metrics are coming in at 10 times a second. And we do know that we can look these both from a volume perspective, so an absolute number, or as a relative per minute value or towards each other. So again, we have a huge amount of data surrounding the player, in which if we do take this back to him or the coaching staff, it's a lot of information to process. And currently there is no consensus within the scientific literature, but there seems to be a relevant set of parameters which we tend to use. So the first step then would be to systemize your data collection, only select those that you can really exert influence upon. So the ability to being used to impact the training program for that particular player. because we believe that the effectiveness is determined by the quality of the decisions you can make from them. Going one step below, we know previous research from a couple of years ago by Aikenhead and Nessis that most clubs tend to use an average of 7+2 metrics when monitoring their training. So what you see over here is the KPIs, the key performance indicators being used for us to conceptualize the measurable constructs of the training process. And we do want to highlight that these are also measured within the academy. So we create a continuous monitoring workflow to once more develop a holistic, data-driven framework of maximizing performance and mitigate injury risk. These metrics, we look to them both from a volume or, if related to time, as an intensity metric. So what we have done is the huge data cloud surrounding a player, we've narrowed them down towards 2 single metrics, which are then ultimately, we're back at the level of the individual athlete. We're able to discuss with them and the coaching staff. So key takeaway, focus on those metrics you can exert influence upon and have the biggest bang for buck. If we then take a small step, a small leap towards the physical preparation of our athletes, you can see that we draw a lot of inspiration from the tactical periodization model. Again, this is a more holistic approach. We do place lots of value in the context of how to reach for a certain training load. So the mental preparation plays a big role as well. And you can see this in a way that the complexity of the exercises of the drills, they will change over time. This will be done in different spaces of the game, different amount of teammates, opponents, or rules being used. At first, we always take a look at the game. So the previous and the upcoming game, which is the highest load of the week, actually the highest bar in red. And key to our approach is that we try to horizontally distribute the metrics across the week. So we do know that all the KPIs selected, we need them to prepare our players for that highest load on game day. And you can see that in the example presented, that on every day we have a different physical target, different spaces, which we tend to use. So once more, we try to break down the complex game of football into simple daily targets for the coaching staff for them to work with, and to help us ensure that the players are ready for match day. Ultimately, we want to have the information available for the coaching staff. And we do believe that the foundations for that are probably laid on the pitch at first. So as you can see in the example, the photo of myself with our head coach. And to do so, we have some considerations to be made. So there's lots of interesting stuff to measure. Again, we have multiple metrics every second coming in, but we do want to select only the important ones. So again, the ability to be used to impact, but also to answer the questions the coaching staff do have themselves. We work by the principle of less is more. We want to use simple but powerful reporting. As you will see in the next slide, sorry, because we do know that high volumes of information, they can be a barrier of the feedback. So we try to make use of color coding, for instance. And last but not least, every coach has his own expectations, personality traits, so the communication should differ between. Some coaches tend to have the report available on the desk printed, and others, they will try to log in on the system themselves. So once more, back to the player, again, centered in the middle with our KPI surrounding him. Inspired by the approach of Owen, we use a multi-metric monitoring strategy. And now we do take the first part of the equation in context, so namely the volume. And we always try to use this one with a direct relationship towards the individual maximum game demands. So these are all put into a bucket, which give us 100% game load from a volume perspective. And we do use the max because we want to improve performance at a maximum capacity of each player on his physical potential. And we do so to improve the training specificity. So we can use these kind of metrics in our training week to have appropriate loading and reduce injuries, but also enhance performance. If we then take this player as an example, we have the maximum game load for each metric. So it's important to say that this wasn't just a single match. So for instance, the total distance can come from a different game compared to the XLs or decels. So again, for each metric, we use the max values to prepare our players for. And then on the right side, we have a typical -2 training session in which you can see the absolute values, the volume of those training sessions, but also being made relative with a color coding towards the individual max. And if we take these all together, this training session would, well, almost being a half of a game. And what we can do with this, we try to make informed decisions regarding the recovery strategies, because we do know that it's half a game. A game typically has 72 hours of recovery time afterwards. So we tend to know that it could be 36 hours of recovery needed for this particular player. And as you can see, the XLs and decels are in amber. So these are targeted the most during this session. We can have some extra recovery strategies of soft tissue mobilization, because we do know we have some mechanical load on the player. In the report showed, we tried to provide some extra context. So we have our KPIs in top, from total distance all the way up until explosive distance. And we have a color coding for each athlete, for each metric. So as an example, the third player, for his XLs and decels, he has had quite a good session from a volume perspective. This was actually a +1 training session. So the guys with the color coding were the substitutes with the training on the pitch, whereas the blue guys, or normally would be like an underload training, were the recovery guys who also train on the pitch. And then just to show you another example, this was a game day. The blue player was a substitute player, which came in the last 10 minutes of the game, whereas the others were within the starting 11, all in red or amber on all metrics. All right, so actually we're at halftime. Some considerations, some key takeaways. Again, we do place a high priority on individualization. Every position, but also every player has to cope with different demands. Going back to the beginning, we place a good value to how the individual copes with everything we place them to. The KPIs, again, select those which you can exert influence upon. We try to create a culture which is based on data-informed decisions. So try to keep it simple, narrowed down towards just a few KPIs. And then create a language that both the player and coach can understand. So we've now highlighted one side of the equation, the volume. Let's now head over towards the context of how we reach for a certain load within the chaotic nature of the game, because we do know it's all about intensity. So I'm going to leave Cherry to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reiner. So straight into it on the topic of intensity. We just wanted to discuss some of the ways we approach intensity, how we use it to report intensity to the head coach, how we analyze our games or matches in terms of intensity. And throughout the presentation, I'll be using one of our fullbacks as an example. You can see his representative game load on the left side. Running total distance of 11.5K. And I think one of the most common ways to measure intensity is just to take the average to get a sense of what he is doing on average each minute. So if you want to calculate the average intensity, simply we take the total game load divided by the amount of minutes he's played, in this case 90 minutes, and we get a average intensity of 130 meters covered each minute. In terms of high speed running, our back is doing 15 meters every minute. In terms of sprinting, he's sprinting 5 meters on average, and so forth. However, this is the chaos of the game we're playing. This is his activity graph we got from his GPS using the Sonra software. What we can see here is that his data is extremely irregular, no real clear patterns, or we cannot predict what's happening. What we do see, if we will zoom in just a second, is that there are periods of relative rest with low physical demands. They are alternated with periods of high physical activity. And we're going to take 2 periods, both are 60 seconds. So here we zoomed in. The above activity graph is a relatively easy period. Our back will be doing way less than the average, so he won't be covering 130 meters. He is certainly not sprinting here during this period. And if we look at the activity graph below, this is actually his most intensive period during the match. We can see that even during the same time frame, things are completely different. So he's doing a lot more. This is a chaotic part of the game. His physical demands will increase dramatically. And we just felt that only looking at average intensity did not describe these 2 events in a satisfying way. So, same game, same player, same match, same average data. But what we did this time is also looked at the max intensity period. The max intensity period is usually a short period of time where we try to find, or where we calculate the most intensive period for a selected metric. So the max intensity period for total distance would be a 60-second period where the total distance covered is highest. And in this case, the fullback ran 210 meters as opposed to the 130 meter on average. We can make a separate calculation for each other metric. So in terms of high speed running during the most intensive minute, during the max intensity period, he actually ran 74 meters, which is quite a significant difference compared to the 50 meters he does on average. We made that calculation for every metric you see on the screen. And yeah, what becomes immediately obvious that if we only look at average intensity, we tend to underestimate what's happening during the more chaotic parts of the game. And this is especially true if the metric we look at gets more intensive. So you can see, especially sprint difference, it's a huge difference between average and intensity. So if we underestimate what's really happening during these peak demands, it follows that we tend to underprepare our athletes. So what Reiner did for volume, we can do for intensity as well. On the left, you see the max intensity periods we calculated in the previous slide for the same match. And with the training session on the right hand, we also calculated the max intensity period for each metric during that training session. The focus on the training session was small-sided games, so small dimensions, and usually from a physical standpoint, we want to overload work being done during accelerating and decelerating. So if we want to overload a metric in terms of intensity or volume, we tend to look at the explosive distance, or the EXPD value for short. And if we compare the 2 max intensity periods from the match and relative to the session intensity from the training, we can see that we did indeed overload explosive distance by quite a margin. Also based on our historical data that we've collected for the past seasons, if we want to overload another value in terms of intensity or max intensity, we know what kind of constraints we can alter. So if we're playing medium-sided games and we want to overload total distance, we can add a restriction in the form of a 2-touch, where players are restricted to only 2 touches of the ball. We know if we add that rule, that total distance will increase. Same with high-speed running or sprinting. If we want to overload that, if we want to encourage player to run faster or at a higher intensity, we can increase the dimensions of the pitch, or we can design specific drills that target these values. So on the topic of drill design, we do design some drills that match or exceed max intensity periods for a player. We do that in the group, so during a training session, but we also do that for end stage rehab, where players are almost returned to play, returned to competition. So the GPS data we receive from an MIP is invaluable for that, but we can add more tools. This is the video manager of Sonra, which we use. We'll be highlighting one of our wingers during a professional Dutch league game. He'll be highlighted in red, and he'll be starting his max intensity period just after this corner kick. So in this video, we combine GPS data with a 2D map to give a sense of the position he's on the pitch. We combine it with video, and we can just check what's happening, add some context to our GPS data we receive in a report. So we're asking questions: what kind of resistance is he getting from his opponents? What are his interactions with his teammates? Where is he running? Where is he moving on the pitch? And does this period happen when his team is in possession, or is it during a transition, etc., etc.? And if we want to design a drill that exceeds or matches the max intensity periods, we can select the most relevant actions for that player. And we can do that for every player. So a winger obviously will have different values, different actions compared to a central defender. So some closing thoughts. For us, the max intensity periods, max demands gives us some extra information about intensity, which we use to report to the head coach. Like we saw with the color coding, it's really easy for the head coach to see if we overloaded the value that we wanted to overload. We use it for analysis of our training session, for our drills. And like I said in the previous slide, we can accurately design drills to prepare our players for the maximum demands during a match. Like I said, it's highly position specific. Expect different values from a central defender compared to a winger. And it will also be drill and game specific. So if we want to overload some high speed running, we'll be using larger dimensions. So we'll be moving towards medium-sided games with larger than normal dimensions, or even large-sided games. If we want to focus more on work like accelerating, decelerating, explosive distance, we'll be using small-sided games. Or different drills that we add during the training session in combination with the technical staff. So it also tells us a story, the max intensity periods of our athletes. We can know a little bit more about the athlete sitting in front of us. Interesting questions to ask. Can our athlete hit values close to maximum, to their maximum repeatedly, or is it a one-time thing? We all know a player that's relatively monotonous. He's able to output a stable intensity, but he's not really explosive when he needs to be. On the other hand, we have a player that's highly explosive but needs a long recovery time before he can hit that intensity again. Another question we might ask ourselves is, when does the MIP occur during the match for that athlete? So is our athlete actually able to perform an intensity close to his maximum at the end of the match, or is he consistently doing this in the beginning? So one interesting thing we found, pretty logical, but does have some implications, is that our substitutes tend to display a more intensive max intensity period compared to starting 11. Makes a lot of sense, because substitutes are expected to bring more intensity to their game if they're only playing the last 15 minutes. But it does have some implications if we have injured athletes at the end stage of their rehab, which are cleared for a return to competition. So if we clear a guy that can play the last 50 minutes of the match, expect him to do more at a more intensive pace than when he is starting. So in this case, we really have to consider a max intensity period as a worst case scenario, where we absolutely have to prepare the athlete for what's coming on the field. And with that, we'd like to thank you for listening, for your attention. We're open for any questions you might have right now, or even in the future. Just drop us an email or a message on LinkedIn. Thank you all.
Great stuff, guys. Thanks a million for that presentation. I'm just going to give you one or two questions then from the comment section there, if you don't mind. Of course, everyone, you can submit comments before or during the presentation as well. So that was a great presentation, lots of detail there, and really as well, fantastic to get an insight into the use of the video integration with the video manager for drill design, and to hear a bit about the max intensity period work that you're doing as well. So just one of the questions that I have here is the specific opponent taken into account when you're preparing? So for example, if you're playing against someone who does a lot of long sprints in a game, or runs more than the average team, do you take that into account when you're preparing your athletes in the week?
Yes, that's actually a great question. We do take that into consideration. For instance, if we expect to have lots of distance behind the defensive line, we try to get our players into that more often during the week. So we know that there will be an overload maybe on high intensity metrics because there's more distance. And then the coaching staff tends to have an 11 versus 11 in which we can alter maybe a long and narrow pitch to get our players prepared for that, also from a football perspective, but both from a physical perspective as well. And that's based on what Cherry was mentioning, that we can alter pitch dimensions or rules to speed up or slow down the game based on what we actually want.
Okay, cool, excellent. And then just another question is, at what point do you think you will be getting more data than you can realistically use?
Yeah, I think almost at any point we can collect so much.
Yeah.
What Reiner, I think, said, we try to crunch it a little bit together to limit ourselves to the factors that we can actually exert some influence on. Yeah, for us, that sometimes is hard because we want to measure everything. I think we do like data and we do like some numbers. But yeah, we try to limit our data collection to what we can actually influence and try to limit it even further when we report to the coach, so it's understandable and easily digestible, if that answers your question.
It does, perfect. That's great. Thanks a million, guys. So our thanks obviously as well to JP and everybody for your work in not only presenting, but also in organizing the event as a whole. So thanks for that, guys.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, so I'll move on to our next speaker then. And again, as with Reiner and Thierry, with David as well, please feel free during the presentation, not just at the end, to submit questions. So I will just, David, if you're there. So David, of course, has been a skilled strategic leader in high performance football and has been in multiple Premier League, Europa League and Champions League campaigns. So I'm looking forward to this presentation as well. And David, if you're there, if you could share your screen, please, that'd be great.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Just a little, perfect. That's a check. I presume everybody can see that.
Yeah, I can see it anyway. Perfect.
Great stuff. Thanks for the welcome, and thanks to JP and the team at FC Utrecht for inviting me to give a presentation today. My presentation might be a little bit different to everybody, what you're expecting, but I thought it would be very important to give you some insights into how you might create a brilliant personal strategy for your own career. We're very good at building strategies to help our athletes achieve their great goals, but what about ourselves? Are we building a strategy that can help bring us on a journey, a purposeful journey, where we do meaningful work every day and we go to work every day and we do something we love? So I hope today I can share some lessons from my journey. My journey is that I've been working in professional football for 20 years now, and I've had a great level of experience and mentors. I've had some ups and some downs, and up until recently, I was the head of physical performance at FC Copenhagen in Denmark. We'd had a great 6-7 year run, and recently the leadership team was removed, so I took my gardening leave. So I'm grateful for something to do today instead of working in my garden. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the employee life cycle. Now, the employee life cycle is very important because we're all on a journey. And if you think about your journey, we all start off and we all want to go somewhere. And along the way, we bump into people that influence us and we try to seek more influence in our careers. So today I'm going to show you how you could become strategic and you can go on the career journey that you would like to. So in the center, we have the strategy, and then we'll work our way around from 12 o'clock to 11 o'clock. What I want you to do today is I want you to listen to this, and I want you to think about why you work for the football club you work for. I want you to start thinking about what's your mindset. And then I want to ask you, why did your football club bring you to work where you are today? And then I want to ask you, does your football club or your organization have a journey that it's on? Is it a purposeful journey? And hopefully by the end of today's presentation, we can answer those questions. So I'd like you to think about your strategy about how you might want to go to the club or the organization that you really, really want to go to. I want you to think about the people you might want to work with. I want you to think about an organization where it's safe to fail, where failure it can be seen as learning, and where it's okay to have a voice and have an opinion. I want you to think about the role that you currently do, and is there a role that you would like to be in? And then I'd like you to overlay the employee life cycle that we've just spoken about. Now, we can all think we want to go and work at Real Madrid, or we all want to go and work at Barcelona, but is that the club for us? The way you know the club for you is that the club is giving you a clue, the way it tells its story. So maybe you've noticed that Bayern Leverkusen is telling a very different story at the moment. So that might be a club for you. But maybe it might be FC Utrecht is telling a very interesting story about its innovation space. That might be a club for you. Or Brentford in the English Championship, they seem to care about their people. Maybe that's the club for you. So all of these clubs have got an external communication strategy. And what they're doing is they're trying to tell you that maybe they are the club for you. So have a little think about that. And get on LinkedIn. That's where you'll find me later on if you want to get some feedback, or if you'd like this presentation, just connect with me on LinkedIn. So the perfect organization, and I love a triangle, but I like to explain it like this. If you go to work every day and you trust each other, then you will feel safe to share things. And if you want to have a little bit of conflict, it's okay to share things with people that you trust. Now, if you can learn and share and fail and win together, then everybody will be committed to the tasks that they've been given. And once you're very good at your task, you'll definitely become more responsible and accountable in the role that your leader has given you. And if you can do that, then the results will come by themselves. That's guaranteed. If you have a workforce, a team that all believes in each other, that believes that we're going to work hard together and everything is going to be safe and we can have as much conflict as we want, then you're going to work in the perfect organization. So to do that, businesses are trying to attract you. There's a global war for talent. Now you might not know that, but Google and all the big companies like Netflix and Amazon, they are projecting to the world that this is a great place to work in. So if you feel that there is a club for you somewhere in the world and they are projecting this, then what they want is they want you to come and work for them. It's very, very important that you scan the market and you think about who it is that you want to go and work for. Think about the people, think about how they share their story, and then think about if they're talking about diversity and inclusivity. And the way I like to explain diversity and inclusivity is that diversity is getting a ticket to the dance, and inclusivity is being asked to choose the music. So you should really look for employers that are talking about diversity and inclusivity and see if you can attract them and go and work with them one day. Now, NASA are one of the biggest companies that have ever tried this before. And if you go back to 1978, they decided that they had a public relations issue. And that public relations issue is that everybody was white and everybody that was going to space was male. So they did a big recruitment drive. And in 1978, they reached out to the markets. And what they found was that they got 6 females, 29 males, every color and creed, and they created one of the most powerful academic groups that ever went to space, and they've carried on since then. Now, one of the things about recruitment and about who you're going to go and work for is that you should do it slowly. It's really, really important to kill your speed in recruitment. If you go into the wrong job, if you go into the wrong organization, and you get locked into that organization, then there is no chance that you are going to grow and thrive and have the fulfilling and meaningful career that you've always wanted. So one of the clues is think about the people who are in that organization. So if you can see they're full of people that are like you, then you should slowly start building relationships with that organization And that can be done through webinars, that can be done through work exchanges, that can be done by jumping into someone's direct messages on LinkedIn. You can choose that strategy. But one of the biggest pieces of advice I've always given the interns and the staff in all of my clubs has always been to stay on the chessboard. And by staying on the chessboard, that means you should stay in your current role and you should work on developing yourself and should work on developing your influence. Because if you take yourself off the chessboard and you start building up gaps in your CV, that is really going to create some problems for you in the future. So always make sure that you stay on the chessboard, but you move to another club with a little bit slower pace than just jumping from one club to the next. Now, to do that, you might want to build a career that actually means something to you. And to do that, to be given the influence to build a career that matters, you have to become very competent in one space. So we would say that you would become a generalist. Now, when you're a generalist, you get time to work on this niche that you're developing. So that could be hamstrings, that could be ankles, that could be data. And as you slowly develop and build those skills, they will become appreciated. Now, later, you might start discovering your purpose. There's a reason why you're on this journey, but often it's very difficult to understand the why. So if you focus on the purpose first before you have secured the skills, then you may find that you'll become disillusionized because you're not doing the work that you consider to be meaningful. And then finally, once you feel like you're doing purposeful work and you're in a career that matters, you will find a mission, something big and powerful, something as a strategic leader that will allow you to help others on their path too. So don't focus on the why, focus on the what. It's very important at the earlier stages of your career. Get very good at asking what questions, and then the why will look after itself. Now, once you've secured the job that you've always wanted, and when you've been onboarded into this job, or if you're currently in a new role, or you're being moved around the role inside your football club, it's very important that you develop some self-awareness. Now, the self-awareness piece allows you to become one of those pieces of the jigsaw that can move around effortlessly inside a business. So if you invest time knowing yourself, knowing what makes you work, the types of relationships you like to have, that level of self-awareness will allow you to build trusting and professional relationships much easier. If you've been able to invest time understanding your method, your process, how you add value to this business, to this organization, then that is also very important, because when you're doing the elevator pitch, and you're stuck inside the elevator with the person you always wanted to work with, then if you can explain what you do, if you can explain your role, if you can explain the tasks that you're very good at, if you understand your process, it will make you look extremely competent in the eyes of that person you're trying to impress. So by spending time understanding yourself and by spending time understanding your process, you'll be able to onboard in any organization or any role. And then it's very important that you understand the things that make you go dark or red or go happy and blue. And if you know your mind, and if you can explain this to other people, and you can build these relationships I talked about, then onboarding will become easy. And the skills that you need can all be done by becoming an expert in storytelling. So I like to call it the elevator pitch. And so once you've been in the elevator and you're standing there with your future leader, you can tell him your story about yourself and your process. Now, to become self-aware and to understand thyself, who you are, you need to work at it, because it's a mental skill that can be trained. And with all things that can be trained, the more you work at it, the better it will become. So if you schedule timetables for reflection, if you practice mindfulness, so if you take breaks from the daily pressure and stress of high performance, if you use positive language with yourself for self-talk, you can become a learned optimist. If you become very good at asking good questions and also become an active listener, that will also help your self-awareness. And if you can find time and the expertise to meditate, that level of reflection and mindfulness will really allow you to grow as a leader and understand thyself. And it's a common thing now in high performance that we keep journals for the things that we do on a day-to-day basis as related to performance. But why not try writing down things that are happening about communication, or things that are happening where you can reflect on, so you're also investing in the development of yourself and not just the development of the players. So learning and developing in your employee life cycle is not about going on CPD. It's not just about going on webinars. It's about spotting opportunities for the personal growth inside an organization. Now, if you have a very defined skill set and you know your circle of competence, you should look around and you should scan the horizon and see who has some skills, some soft skills that you need to integrate into your skill set for your journey within an organization. So maybe you should map out what your journey would look like, do a SWOT analysis on who you are today, and maybe look at a role model, someone in a high performance management position, someone in a strategic leadership position, maybe a mentor or a role model that you know, and ask, how am I going to get there? What are the steps I should take? And once you've decided on that, you have to open your own mindset and become coachable. So we often ask players if they're coachable and how did they respond to yesterday's session? What did they do when they reflected? But do we ask each other enough? What did you learn today from that communication session? How did you feel that debrief went? What did you think of that guy's body language? And did we build enough rapport today? So you want to be coaching each other and you want to develop a coaching mindset. Having a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset will separate potential leaders as they go on these great journeys. And once you scan the horizon for people who are on great journeys, you should lean into them and you should connect with them. Because if someone is on a purposeful journey, if someone is moving towards a great mission in their life, they will have gone over the first hurdle, which we call the first mountain, and they will now be climbing their second mountain. And everybody who is on their second mountain is looking for a life of morals, a meaningful life, purposeful life, and they're always happy to make sure that they will let other people flourish and they will bring them on the journey together. And once you've met these people, it's fair to ask to be mentored, but you must repay the favor and you must become a mentor for other people. So these soft skills on your journey can become extremely beneficial, and they don't take any time. They don't take any academic investment. And you can do all of this on YouTube and by reading books. Maybe join Blinkist, which is like the 15-minute book app. And you can absorb huge amounts of information on podcasts. And all of this will help you learn and develop within your organization in a safe space so you can take the next step on your journey. So before you do that, before you can move on in your journey, you have to build your competence. You have to increase your circle of competence. Now, one of the great skills is knowing what you know. One of the great fallacies in life is not knowing what you don't know. So when you get into the zone of thinking you know something that you really don't know, this is a problem for everybody you work with. And this can often happen when a physio starts talking to a football coach, or when we have somebody who doesn't have any coaching badges starts giving advice to a player on what they should do in a game. And there's a lot to be said about knowing what your competencies are and staying within that perimeter. Now, if you are confident and if you slowly focus on your competencies and you build out your perimeter, you will move from the field of being a generalist to become a specialist. So this is your area that you own a lot of. You've made your area of competence bigger. And once you've secured that role, you're willing to accept any tasks. Now, those tasks can become extremely valuable in the football club or organization that you really want to go and work for. And the key here is matching the skills that you have, the large area of specialist competences that you have, with an organization that has a need for them where you can bring a competitive advantage. So when you're thinking about the football clubs that are looking to attract great people, well, if your skill set is very attractive to them and you've invested in becoming a specialist, in that niche, then you will definitely be suitable for them when they go through the recruitment process, because there is a war for talent because there's only so many experts out there. So when you're in a football club and when you're going above and beyond and when you're doing all the extra things, what you really need is you need your employer to recognize this. You need your boss, you need your line manager, you need your strategic leaders. You need them to celebrate what you're doing. This extra effort, going above and beyond every day, this is called discretionary effort. And this is the positive energy. This is the heartbeat of the dressing room. This is the positive feedback. This is the guy who walks in and lights up the whole room. He's the person that picks up people off the floor when they've had a bad day. This doesn't seem to be part of your specific role, but you bring it and you bring all this energy to work. Now, if you can bring discretionary effort to work, this is really, really going to help you in your role, because you'll become identified as someone that when times get hard, when we start cutting budgets, when COVID budgets even cut all the staff and put them on furlough, you become this indispensable person, someone who can't leave. Now, the psychological contract here is that the organization has given you a contract and they agree to pay your wages, and you, on the other half, decide to give them commitment and bring discretionary effort. Now, if you don't get recognized, if you don't feel appreciated by the people you work for, this is a sign that the leadership is really not appreciating your above and beyond energy and this discretionary effort. And that might give you a clue that maybe you're not working in the right organization. And if you're looking across at other organizations that are celebrating their staff and who visibly are showing a huge amount of recognition for all the people in their team, maybe this is the type of club that you like to work for. So again, when you think about people and you think about who's trying to attract the war on talent, these guys are always celebrating and making their staff feel appreciated. And we all like to be rewarded financially, but what I think everybody needs to understand is that there's other ways that we can be recognized, and it doesn't always have to be the financial rewards, and the research seems to back this. So discretionary effort is very, very important because the team is made up of two types of people. We have the formal roles. We have the guys that have been given this authority by the CEO or by the performance directors. And then we have these informal roles. We have guys who are full of energy. We have mentors. We have the guys that distract people. We have the guys that make sure we all sit around and have a coffee together. But both of these parts of the team are responsible for bringing the extra energy. And if you can bring energy on a social way, and if you can bring energy by focusing on your tasks, what you're going to get is you're going to get a better organization. And if everybody is bringing that and everybody accepts their roles, then the discretionary effort will give you that little bit extra that will give you something that we call what it takes to win. It means that your department and your team will get over the line. So maybe if you take a moment to think back to places you've worked or clubs you know, where people haven't been able to accept their roles, where people won't go above and beyond, where people check out early, where people don't want to go and watch the games even when they're not involved. These guys are not bringing the extra effort. And without that extra effort, you're not going to have a team that can be successful. Now, that's a negative psychological contract, and you won't have a high trust team, and you'll probably have more conflict. So if we go back to the triangle at the start, everything is around having a functional organization with trust, conflict, safety, and commitment, giving you results. So we're coming towards the end now of the employee life cycle. And once you've been inside an organization for a great time, we all want to move up the ladder. We all want to get closer to the top. We all want to become someone who can influence their department or influence a situation or maybe influence a game. So to do that, the steps you have to take is you have to become task orientated and support the players or the man above you. Develop your competence, make sure that your skills are securing this large circle of competence. And once you are become competent, make sure that you're expanding your influence and that you're able to help the line manager above you and the person beside you or the player that you're working with. Make sure you're able to help them obtain their goals as well. And once you've created a feedback culture inside your life, once you've asked for feedback, once you're happy to receive negative and positive feedback, once you understand that we all have blind spots and you seek feedback no matter what, because it's not always going to be a sunny day in performance culture. There's going to be a lot of dark clouds. Once the people above you can see that you're in a feedback culture, they will start rewarding you with more leadership responsibility, more management on daily operations. And this will make you stand out as a leader. And this will allow you to perform and progress within your organization. And if you can live your life and align your processes with the values of that organization, then you will become a standout candidate for any promotions that might happen internally. Because an organization will often want to hire and promote internally instead of going externally, because you fit the culture if you've been able to align with that club's purpose. So once you've built your influence inside a department, or once you've built a power structure inside your football club, it's very important to understand how you use that. Because by exerting power or by using influence, you also have the ability to help others take action. And if we only think about task acceptance, if we only think about helping a player understand that a recovery run is important, or helping an intern understand how to make sure his daily tasks are completed on time, or helping the line manager who needs all of the data at the end of the day get it on time, the power and influence that you have, if you exert it, you will make everybody else's life better. So we have two different types of power that we can use. We have reward power, which is a soft power, and that will definitely make life easier. And then we have a harder coercive power, which is a little bit more direct, which might be a management tool. But if you can use these tools of power and influence in your role, and you have good values, and you're aligned with the purpose of the organization and the daily mission of your department, then task acceptance will go through the roof in your department or in your remit. But if people don't see that you have great values, if people don't see that your purpose is not aligned, if they can see you're a little bit Machiavellian and you're trying to get people to do things under coercion, then maybe things like power and influence can backfire on you. And then you might wonder why you never get that new position, or you get promoted into a senior role. And that's when you have to step back, and then you have to go back and think, do I know myself? Do I have any personal blind spots? Am I in the right environment? Am I working with people that appreciate my talents? So have a little think about how you use power and influence and the employer you work with. And if you're not aligned with their purpose, that might make you think that it's time to change jobs and look for another one. But that's why we're doing the employee life cycle, so I can give you some tools to do that. So the final slide is, you have to make a choice. When you wake up every day, are you going to work, or are you doing something you love? Do you feel like you're getting burnt out? Is the daily stress, the tasks, the deadlines, the travel, the 3-game weeks, the English weeks, is that all becoming too much for you? Are you in an organization that doesn't appreciate your talents? So you have to reflect, and you really have to step back and ask yourself, am I a hostage here? Am I a hostage inside my organization and I don't want to leave? And that's the famous story of the Stockholm Syndrome hostages, a group of hostages that were held prisoner, and they didn't want to leave their captors, the hostage takers, because they had built a psychological bond with them and they wanted to stay close. So it's very important that you ask yourself every morning when you get out of bed, are you jumping out of bed, or is it a slog? Now, Amazon have a great way of dealing with this. They actually pay employees $5,000 to leave, because they believe that the value of a disgruntled employee inside their business killing their culture is worth $5,000 to ask you to leave. So if you join the first year, they will give you $1,000. But after 5 years, if you've decided that Amazon isn't for you and their pace setting culture is a bit too much, they will actually put $5,000 on the table. And it's very important that if you decide to leave your club, that you both find a common ground that you can leave with love. You want to put all your cards on the table. You want to tell them about your well-being or your mindset or how your values are different, but make sure that you leave with love, because how you manage your exit is as important as how you manage your onboarding. And when we talked about the storytelling of onboarding, we also need to know that as you leave, it has to be a positive affair. So make sure that if you do use any of this information, that it's a positive exit as you come off the chessboard. So here are some clues that you might be burnt out. When you're at work, you can have relational conflicts with people. It can be about, I don't like working with this guy. When you're at work, you can have process arguments about how we should do something. Sometimes you might have a clash of clash of philosophy with the new coach about this is how we should play or this is how we should attack. And sometimes you might do things that sabotage your career, that derail your career. You're actually fighting with yourself. You become too stressed, or maybe you're too complacent. Now, if any of these points resonate with you, there is a high chance that you are burnt out and that it's time to step back and maybe take some time to appreciate the things you have in life. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. It's a little bit different to what you were probably expecting, but I hope that I have lit a light bulb for you. And if you can just take a moment to reflect, what I'd like to ask yourself is, have you invested some time in understanding yourself? Do you know thyself? Has anything I've said shifted your mindset? Do you need to recalibrate your mindset anymore? Have you thought about your employer and the purpose journey that they are on? And if you are aligned for them, are you the best fit? Is there another place for your talent? And have you thought about the second mountain that you might want to climb? That's a meaningful career where you're on mission, you have a purpose, you're developing other people, you're sharing and you're mentoring. Is it time for you now to step out of that comfortable role you're in and develop something else and go off on a purposeful journey? And if you do feel that you're burnt out, does your family need you? Are you missing birthdays? Are you missing celebrations? Are you dedicating everything to the football club? Did you miss something in COVID that you really, or did you see something in COVID that you really wish you hadn't have been giving up for many, many years? It's time to reflect on those things and ask yourself, as part of your career, is it worth giving up everything for your family? So I'm available on LinkedIn. You can find me. And if you'd like me to share this slide deck, I'll do that with JP and the team. And I'm open for any questions.
Great stuff, David. Thanks for that. I think it was really interesting what you said there at the start about performance staff spending a lot of time, developing athletes, but not spending very little time really, thinking about developing themselves. So not to mention, becoming coachable, which is a term that we hear a lot. So thanks a lot for that. We have some questions. You talked a lot about reflection and stuff there. So Pete asks, when you reflect on your own qualities and skills, how do you make sure not to over or underestimate yourself?
Yeah, this is a really great question. Thank you, Pete. So one of the key things is that you write down your core skills. Then you go into a 360 with your colleagues. You get a line manager and you get someone you trust. And then you ask them to write down what they see. So then you have a 360. Then you have to take the brave step of doing a blind spot review. You have to sit down with somebody who is watching you from a distance and say, could you please write some things down that you know about me that you think I don't know about myself? And this vulnerability will give you so much rewarding information that somebody will be able to say, hey, look, you think you're a great communicator, but you never look people in the eye. You seem very direct with your information and you're very quick to critique people. So by undertaking a personal reflection, a 360, and asking about your blind spot, that will open up so much learning for you that will actually create the pathway in the journey and that you can follow.
Cool. And then the second question that we have here is what kind of mistakes or even what is the biggest mistake you've seen sports scientists, performance staff, any staff make when they come into a club for the first time?
And that would be so common to not listen. So you have to become an expert in active listening and maybe have a 100-day strategy that for 100 days, I'm going to watch, learn, observe. I'm going to write down in my journal everything that I see. I'm going to ask great questions to get clarity on what I saw. I'm not going to have any heuristics or jump to conclusions. And once I have gone through that process myself, I will then add my expert opinion or some points that I've learned to the pot of knowledge that is already inside a high performance department. Now, it's called a high performance department for a reason. And that usually means that everybody within a high performance department, this is not their first rodeo. So if you are an intern or a student or the new guy, there is a huge possibility that you're going to step outside your circle of competence early. And simply by being patient and looking for clarity and doing the journaling, you will learn so much and you will probably save yourself a few faux pas along the way.
That's great. Thanks a million, David. That was very different, like you said, but I really enjoyed it. So cheers, much appreciated. Thank you.
Super. Thank you.
Okay, we're moving on now to our third presentation of the afternoon or the evening at this stage. So we have Peter Kaciu. So Peter holds a master's in movement sciences and physical education, as well as a PhD in kinesiology, so both from KU Leuven. He started immediately after as a senior R&D manager at STATSports Lab. So that was a spin-off company from KU Leuven, which focuses on the development of an athlete performance management system for professional football as well as other sports. So Peter then moved to professional football as a physical coach for the first team at KRC Genk in Belgium. He was there between 2011 and 2017, at which point he became the physical coach for Royal Antwerp FC, who had only just been promoted to the first division at the time, where he's now head of performance, so at Royal Antwerp. So Peter, if you are there and able to share your screen, the stage is yours.
Yes, Patrick, I'm here. I will try to share my screen.
Excellent.
Yes. Okay, you can see everything?
Perfect. Good
Okay.
man.
Thank you, Patrick, for the nice introduction, and thanks STATSports and also Jeroen and Rainer for inviting me for this webinar to be in this fantastic lineup of speakers. So I'm very happy to share my thoughts on how we create a holistic approach here in Royal Antwerp FC on the football athletes. But first of all, I wanted to introduce a little bit on the team, Royal Antwerp FC itself, because it's the oldest team in Belgium. We're called the Great Old here in Belgium. And like you said also in the introduction, we're only now for 4 years back into the first division. And like you see here on the picture, since then, the club and our president are really building this club, really building it literally with 2 new stands around the pitch. But we're also really building the team back from scratch and building all the structures behind the team and also the youth academy. So in these 4 years, we did already an amazing job, and I want to share with you how we have created so far and still creating the holistic approach to the football athletes. And therefore, I want to thank also my all my colleagues, because it was a teamwork, and it's still a teamwork, and we're heading well towards new horizons with the club. To start, I want to start a little bit with some data you all know. This is data from any given Thursday. It was a Thursday in a very successful Thursday in October. These are all data you probably know, the total distance the players run in a game. the high speed, which is for me above 20 kilometers per hour, and the sprint distance above 25. But just to show you the differences between all the different players on the pitch, and also in their different positions. You can see some players run up to 12 kilometers, while others maybe reach only 9 to 10 kilometers, and the same for high speed and sprint distance. There are a lot of huge differences between the positions, but also between the players. And it's not only on a Thursday nowadays, it's almost every day. You have to be ready for competitive football. Some days you have a game on Monday, Tuesday, and so on. The whole week long, you can have a game, and you have to be able to be in top form at any given day in the week. And sometimes it's really a hard day at work, because you see now the figures in red. It's the worst case scenario for our positions this season, and you can see the figures here. Some players are even running up to 13.5K, while others run up to 11, but also you can see the high speed running sometimes going up to almost 2K, sprint distances around 500 meters, and so on. So our players have to be ready for this every day, and that's why we created a whole approach to guide our players to deliver their best performances any day of the week. So, like, all different players, all different positions, different type of players, they have to be ready to take all those top games, over 50 games in a season. So we have to prepare them on any aspect, physical aspect of the football. So they need their speed, they need endurance, agility, and so on. But we have all those different types to be ready for the games. To do that, to create this approach, we used actually a framework published earlier by Mathieu Lacombe and colleagues on the framework for them on the training load monitoring, starting from the data capture up to the staff decisions. So we translated this a little bit to our own situation, and this is actually the red line through my presentation from data capture to staff decisions. So I will start with the data capture. All the things you all know, like heart rate monitoring, GPS tracking, like I show here, NordBord, groin bar, force decks, but it can also be questionnaires players have to fill in on their smartphone, data which is collected by physiotherapists, by a doctor, by other members of staff. All possible data points you capture on your players and on your team. The second step will be, of course, then get all those data, all the data into one system where you have a good overview, so into an athlete management system where you can handle this data and where you can make combinations between data, where you can try to find correlations, and where you can make, of course, the steps towards staff decisions. Next step after the good data storage is, of course, the data transformation in the system, data analysis, and at the end, the visualization, so you can go with very nice data sheets to your staff to make a profound decision whether a player should play or whether a player is able to train at that day. So this is actually let's say, the red line through my presentation. I will start with the data capture. Here's a picture of one of our players, homegrown players of the city, with all the possible data we can capture on this player. It's quite a lot. You can see, of course, the things on fitness. You take the weight, for instance, so you collect data on his body composition, but you do also like a treadmill test or sprint tests, anything you like to know all about his fitness, about his capacities, but also daily medical staff, paramedical staff is collecting data on the well-being of the player. Physiotherapists gathering data, osteopaths, can be a visit to the dentist where data is gathered on the player. Also for biochemistry, we take blood samples, urine samples. Maybe you do some tests about muscle fiber typing. You do some lifestyle tests. You do some neurocognitive tests. All together data on the player to know the specific characteristics of this player. But at the same time, you also do some daily monitoring, like the GPS tracking, to know the load of the training session, to know the load of the game, to be able to adapt your training session to the player's needs, of course. And at the same time, I mentioned that the training facilities, that's something we will be doing in the future. We're doing not at the moment, but for instance, you want to measure also maybe your pitches to see what's the hardness of the pitch, how is the traction on the pitch, is there energy restitution of the pitch, restitution on the pitch. So you want to know everything on your pitch, on your facilities to be sure that your players are training in the best conditions, playing in the best conditions, and hoping that we'll never have an injury based on a bad pitch, for instance. So we do periodical testing and daily monitoring for let's have a daily 360 view on each player. All this data, of course, yeah, you need to handle this data. It's a lot of data sheets, a lot of data points that you collect. And you want to bring this all together to have, of course, at the end, a profound decision with the management, with the staff. And therefore, you need an athlete management system that can, of course, handle all this data, but also a system that's tailor-made to your own team. So we were looking for a flexible, fully customizable athlete management system that's also able to automatize all data flows into the system. Because you're not there to only capture data, you're of course there to analyze all the data that's coming into the system. And for that, we chose for Smartabase, an athlete management system that allowed us to customize all these data flows to our own wishes. All the data is always coming in automatically via CSV uploads or APIs, players filling in questionnaires on the mobile app, third-party integration. So all data flows immediately into the system. And from there on, of course, all data gets manipulated, and then we build our visualizations, our dashboards. Just to show you how this works, some examples on the monitoring we do on a weekly basis with the ForceDex, Nordboard, and the Force Frame. For the ones who don't know the systems, you see on the left side, you see the ForceDex. So these are force platforms where players will do on a weekly basis 3 counter movement jumps. In the middle, you see the Nordboard platform where players do also on a weekly basis 3 times the Nordic hamstring exercise. And on the right side, you see the Force Frame of Vault, where players also do 3 times the squeeze and pull action on the Force Frame in a supine position. Just to show a little bit how it works for the ForceDex, so players will do a counter movement jump. This will give you, like you see on the left top on the left side, you see the graph with very specific details on the jump, on the landing force, on the flight time, contraction time, of course the jump height. You have a lot of data, but it's too much to deal with on the moment you do the test, of course. So this data will go automatically into our athlete management system, where it's transformed data sheets, and then of course in the end to a dashboard where you can see on the right bottom, you see, for instance, a very fast the jump height for the last test, and you can compare it with your former jumps. And on the right side, for instance, you see the maximal power. So for any data point you like, you have like a nice dashboard to check what was happening during the jump. Same, for instance, for the Nordboard. So players will do the Nordic hamstring exercise with the strength and conditioning coach. He will be there with the iPad next to the Nordboard platform. You can see on the top left corner, you can see a graph of three Nordic hamstring exercises, where the blue line represents the left side and the orange line the right side. This is a nice execution of the exercise, so you can immediately see the absolute values of the power in the left or right hamstring, and yeah, you can evaluate this immediately on the spot. We aim, for instance, for the hamstring exercise to 350, even 400 Newton for the players, and you can also immediately see the imbalance between left and right. This graph is a nice, very nice graph where left and right are almost perfectly on the same line. But of course, sometimes you see a lot of differences, and but we try to keep this difference between or below 10% and even below 8% if possible. Also here, this data, so like I said, you can see it immediately on the iPad, but this data goes immediately through to the athlete management system, where you can have then a nice view on the power. You see immediately the figures, and you can again compare these data with past data, where you see the graph on the right bottom side, where you can see the evolution and also see the evolution of the imbalance in the performance between left and right. Just as an example here, this is a graph of a new player that came in just before start of the competition. You can see the absolute values of this player was below 300 at the time. In the following weeks, gradually getting better up to almost 400. Small difference in the beginning from only 3%, 6%, and then again 3.5%. But then after, let's say, 4 weeks, there was suddenly an issue on the left side. The difference became bigger, and the player wasn't able to do 3 repetitions. And even the week after, he was only able to do 1 repetition. So there was a problem on the left side. But by tracking this every week, we were able to keep this player in the squad, to keep him selectable for every game and playing every game. But of course, in the week, in the run to the game, sometimes he was out of the training session just to give him extra training on or extra treatment for this issue on the left side. But by tracking this weekly, we could keep him into the squad, and he was not injured on his hamstrings on the left side. This left graph is a picture from Vault Performance itself. Like I said, in our system, it's translated again into the bigger data flow, and there you can see the same evolution in the beginning, the same I showed on the left side, but then the evolution later on in the season. So this imbalance kept for a while going on, but then eventually we could get it away, and this player kept on training and performing at his best throughout the rest of the season. An example from the fourth frame. So on the left side, you see the graphs from Vault. Again, this data gets pulled through to the athlete management system, Of course, again, at first sight, you can check the absolute values for the squeeze and the pull, which is for us about around 190 for the adductors to 170 for the abductors. Again, the imbalance, we try to keep it below 10%. And we check also for the ratio between adductors and abductors, which should be around 0.8 to 1. Again, all data flows through to the management system. And there again, you can do the analysis of the data, absolute values, imbalance, and ratio. For these 3 tests, our S&C coach will make every week a report, which he delivers to the staff to see where are the problems for some players. This will not mean that the players in red will go out for training, but it's just to show that, okay, there can be a problem. We need to give attention to this player for this specific problem. This can be either treatment or can be an individual training session in the gym, or maybe a modified training session on the pitch to avoid getting an injury. So this is something we weekly do with the players, to check the players and to keep them at their best. So from the data transformation, data analysis, we go to the data visualization, because of course you gather a lot of data points, but you need to translate it into data sheets or dashboards, like we call them, which can tell you something, which can tell the player something. This is an example for the sum of the 7 skin folds taken from the players. This is like a visualization, a dashboard for the players. At the same time, of course, the coaches, they want to know also this data, but they need some more data. For instance, the dashboard for the coaches will tell them every day what's the weight of the player, while, for instance, for the medical staff, they need even more detail. They want to know from the specific body parts which skin fold was more than before, or was maybe less than before. They want to see the whole evolution over a longer period, so they have more insight into the actual measurement of the specific player. At the same time, we also built some hubs. One hub is for the performance staff, the other one for the medical staff, where they can go from one data point to another. Like you see here on the left side, it's now opened on monitoring, on hydration, just to see the scores of the urine samples of the players, but you can go easily to body composition, to wellness, to the Norbord data, or you can go to the performance tests the players performed in the beginning of the season or in winter break. Same for the medical staff. They can go from, like here, from the general maintenance of the physiotherapist to all the data. The osteopath will fill in the data of the masseur, pedicure, and so on, to maybe the past injuries the player suffered, or also you can watch all the monitoring data, the training and game loads, to have a good idea on the player's status at the time. Now, all this data should lead to a staff decision. Who is going to train, who is able to train, who has to be, or who has to stay inside, maybe for treatment, who has to do a modified program, or for the game, who is selectable, who can play the game. Of course, like I showed now before, there's a lot of data points. We gather the data capture is an enormous part of this the system. But from all these data points, how we can get to an informed decision, because what's the combination between all the data points? How can we come to the decision a player can actually train, can actually play a game? So sometimes you will get lost in all those data points, in all those tables and graphs. So we need to have a good look on this data because we need to present to the technical staff. We need to tell them what's the medical status of a player and what's the fitness status of a player. A medical status for us is like is divided into 6 steps. First of all, when a player is not injured, of course, he's fully available for training. But when a player is injured, he can be totally unavailable. In the worst case, that's a day when he has a surgery, for instance. He is unavailable. He will not be at the club. Second phase is the indoor rehab. This player will stay inside for treatment with the physios, for exercise therapy in the gym. Next phase can be the outdoor rehab. He has his treatment inside, but then he goes outside for exercise therapy or already some exercises on the pitch. Next phase will be the modified phase, where the player can be already partly in training for a warm-up, for a passing drill, and then maybe some exercises with a physiotherapist or a strength and conditioning coach afterwards. And then, of course, the green phase is when he's back available, back selectable for training sessions and for games. On the other side, the fitness status, based on the periodical testing you do during the season, but also on your daily monitoring, all the data you gather on this player should give you a red, an orange, or let's hope always a green light on his fitness status, which means that he's ready and fully available to train at his best level. But like I said, you can get lost in all those data points, in all those data sheets. So we need to have a better look on it and try to find the right connection between all the data points to have a good and informed decision on each player. And therefore we started only recently, I think a year ago, with the new technologies, machine learning and artificial intelligence on our data to have like an everyday, like an injury risk assessment and a performance assessment of every player. It's a difficult job, and that's why we hired some data scientists of Equipa to do this job for us, to have these models on injury risk assessment and performance assessments, because these are quite big models that are running continuously in the background. They're learning on the past performances and the injuries to determine the actual status of the players, and of course, hopefully in the future also to predict their status. As these models are learning on big data, we need a lot of data. So this means for an injury risk assessment, the more injuries you have, the more accurate the model will be. But of course, that's something we don't like. We don't like to see as fitness coaches, as physiotherapists, as coaches in general. So that's maybe an invitation to other clubs and invitations and federations to work together to bring data together on injuries of players, to have like even bigger data on injuries to have a good view, to be able to determine even more accurately our injury risk assessment. This is an example of how we do it now with the data scientists. You see in the graphs, you see the blue line, which is the risk score, the risk probability, the risk for an injury. The green fields you see on the graphs are the injuries based on medical attention. So it's smaller injuries or smaller issues which do not lead to the player stepping out of training sessions or or not being able to play games with a medical attention, they still can. They're still selectable, still able to play games or to train. The red zones you see on the graphs are the time loss injuries. So these are the real injuries, the moments the players are injured and out of training and out of game. So on the top left side, you see one graph where it's raising up to over 80% and a red zone behind. So the injury risk was very high and he got injured in the end. Of course, this is data we can see only now in backside. So at the time we didn't have the data, because then we probably had made an intervention to avoid this injury. But as we started only, let's say a year ago, we have the data for not such a long time. So this is in backside. But now, at the moment, we are able to see this data coming through every day. So we have the live data. And of course, when we would have peaks in this graph, like you see on the top left side, we would have to make an intervention or get the player out of a training session or give him an adapted program to avoid, of course, the injury. On the right side, you see the tables with green bars and red bars. These green bars means that a specific parameter has a positive influence on the injury risk score. A red bar, of course, is a negative impact on this score. And this is always based, all these parameters is based on all the data we gather. So for instance, all the data of Norbord groin bar, which I showed before, will be in there. All the data you gather with the GPS, with the heart rate monitoring, all the data on injuries, everything is in there and is analyzed in the big database. So this brings me to one of the slides at the start. So after data capturing, after data storage in our athlete management system, where we chose for Smartabase to have a fully customized athlete management system, the data is also analyzed by our data scientists of Equipa to bring us to the staff decisions, where we can deliver to the technical staff a medical status and a fitness status of every player, so that they can make the right decision to play a player on a specific position in the game. So this is the data sheet how it looks like when we step to the technical staff, where you can see all the players with some data also on their wellness score. But what's the most important is, of course, the colored banner at the top of their player card. When it's green or even light green, this player is ready to train based on the fitness and the medical status. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. What I want to tell you that just this holistic approach is very important to have an optimal player guidance, but it's important that you build this from a club-specific view, and best of all, you can make it in a specific management system that's customizable to your needs, so you can translate all your data to profound decisions for the technical staff. And this is all, of course, with the objective to maximize player availability while enhancing performance and preventing injuries. So it should be everybody's objective to maximize your player availability, to be able as a team to have the best performances possible with your team throughout the whole season. Thank you very much for your attention, and if there are any questions, feel free to ask them. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Peter. a really thorough insight into what you're doing there at Royal Antwerp, what kind of data you're collecting, and I suppose more importantly then how that fits into the whole decision-making process for you and the rest of the technical staff. So thanks for sharing. Yeah, I have one question here. So as you said, in the future, it might be possible to have an injury prediction estimation.
Mm-hmm.
What are the chances that as coaches will change their training programs based on a prediction score, and how do you see that working?
Well, I must say at this point, I think we have already a coach now at this moment, and I believe there are many coaches now who will adapt already their training sessions and the availability of players to the decisions of a medical staff, because sometimes we pull players out of the training session based on the tests you saw on Forsdex, force frame or Norboard, because we believe they're at high risk to have an injury. And I believe if it's if all these measurements, this analysis we make with the data scientists in the future are pretty stable, then I think we can have pretty profound prediction on possible injuries. I will not say we can predict injuries, but I think we will have a good view on possible injury risk, and I think then it would be wise to, if the injury risk is really high, to maybe listen to the medical staff, to maybe pull one player out of a training session to give him a separate modified program, or maybe in the worst case pull out of one game to prevent injuries, and then maybe be able with this player to play the next game. I think it's possible to at least predict an injury risk. I would not say predict injuries, because I don't really think it's possible to really predict what will be happening. Yeah. But at least to have a good idea on the injury risk.
Of course, yeah. No, I suppose it ties into something like what David mentioned earlier. Is it depends on the environment and the setup of each individual club too, how much of a role that data and such kind of prediction scores, holistic prediction scores, play in decision making.
Yeah, correct.
Perfect. So Peter, thank you very much for that, and we'll chat to you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to our last presentation of the evening. So we have Maximilian Lankheit. So Max is currently serving as the head of strength and conditioning at VfL Osnabrück in Germany's Bundesliga 2. So he holds a master's degree in high performance sport and is accredited with both the NSCA and the ASCA. He has held various positions, worked in several countries and continents. He has spent time in the Bundesliga, in Major League Baseball and Major League Soccer, as well as in Germany. So Max, if you're there and you could share your screen, that would be great.
Cheers, mate. I will try to do so.
So everyone, just remember you can submit questions during Max's presentation at any point as well. So yeah, I can see that, Max. So
perfect.
You.
Beautiful. I tend to swear, which is why I'm glad that I can just write it down so I don't have to say it. So the presentation is about operations management. So I think you guys managed very well today to get a diversity of people on the call or on the webinar, right? And David spoke about the people side of things, and I'm trying to now look at the environment of things, because I think it's important that we not only look at the people, but also at the environment that have to work. They have to work in, right? So essentially, I'm trying to get this moving forward. So that brings me to my About Me page. Why did I chose this? Because I think past performance is no predictor of future success, right? Hence, the only competitive advantage we will always have is what David spoke about, the people as well as the environment. Hence, the reason why I chose this today one more time. This is what we're going to look into today. So what is the question? The main question today, which will be around process design. And we go through the theory and then the application in a real application that I used here in my current environment. And at the end of it, obviously, we have some takeaways. And why do we talk about this? And I think this quote sums it up perfectly well. We always need to improve what we're doing. Because like I said earlier, that's the only or one of the two components of the competitive advantage we get. We can always develop, always improve what we're already doing. So the systems thinking perspective is very important in that regard. So what once was shiny, maybe now a little bit rusty, right? So the big question today is, how can we maximize strength training benefits without sacrificing its programming? So what do we know, essentially? We all have our philosophy, I suppose, right? Which means we have a certain exercise selection, a certain exercise duration. We know how we want to split sessions. We have a fixed time available. We do have space constraints, meaning like, how does our gym look like? And obviously we know how many players we have to serve, right? But at the end of the day, and this is why I chose this picture from our preseason, it's a regular team picture, but as you can tell, things never go the way we planned. So instead of them actually standing there to take a picture, obviously everything broke down and we had to then improvise. So what we're trying to do with operations management is essentially to minimize those uncertainties, right? Because there's enough already that we're coping with on a day-to-day basis. So why is it important to know about operations management? Well, the essential answer to this question is because it is the language of our front office, right? So I guess a lot of you guys have experienced in an instance, and I'm just assuming here, obviously, but from my personal experience, I can say this when we say like, I need another bench, right? Or I need a new GPS system, or I need an AMS, and so on and so forth, right? But we need to be able to then put everything in a way that the front office understands, that they essentially go like, all right, yeah, I can understand. Here's some money, go buy something or the one thing that you think you need right now. So again, what is the first step? So the first step is process mapping. So when we think about strength training, there's an input, right? And there's an output. But then it's a huge black box. So we need to get this black box obviously a little bit more transparent. So we can go and transform this into a gray box, which essentially means there's exercise 1 and so on and so forth until we reach the output. But it's essentially not a transparent box yet, because it becomes a transparent box if we, from an operations management perspective at least, if we know exactly how long those exercises take and how the flow of this whole thing looks like, right? So, and I know there's lots of sports scientists, I assume once again, on this webinar. So I think you guys are used to numbers. So let's look at the process demand in step 2, right? As I said at the very beginning, there's some things we do know, which is the time we have available, right? We also know how many players we have to serve. And we also know how many, and I'm going to go back here, how much time it takes us to go through all the exercises we have planned, right? So if we have those 3 components, we can then calculate the cycle time. Sometimes this is called takt time. So that's the same thing, right? If you read about this in some way or the other, it's the same thing. So, and the cycle time is the time available divided by the numbers of players I have. So cycle time essentially means that it's in a process, in any process for that matter, right? It's the time between each output. So let's say a player, right, he finishes a session. How long does it take until the next player finishes his or her session, right? In this example, it's every 10 minutes, right? What is the process capacity though? So that is the throughput time, so the combined amount of minutes it takes to perform all exercises, right? Divided by the cycle time. So then that means we need to have 4 players in the entire process at the same time to be able to fulfill the demands, okay? And again, if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box so we can go through that later. So what I just said means every 10 minutes a player needs to finish the session in order to ensure that they're all done or processed within the time constraints. And 4 players have to be served at the same time, right? And like I said, that means that we actually ensure that everybody gets served. So let's go into the step 3, which is process balancing, or in other words, the process arrangement at the very beginning. So as you can see here, we can go in more or less like a line approach, which means there's 4 exercises like we had in the little box in advance, right? And that's 10 minutes per exercise. So 1 player every 10 minutes. And we call this a long and thin process, right? It's easy to manage, it's high specialization, but it's also monotonous work. Allocation losses usually apply, and it's not a very robust process model, because as you can tell, if one of the stations break down, for example, then we have a problem, right? Because there's still other players coming in that line, and then we run into an issue there at some stage. So the other component, the other extreme, would be a so-called short fat process, which also means that we have everybody every 10 minutes, but essentially they're all working in parallel, right? So it takes 40 minutes for each person, but they're working in parallel. Essentially, also every 10 minutes, we have an output if we calculate that down from the 40 minutes. So we usually have no allocation losses. It's robust and it's flexible. But every station requires care. The logistics are usually very complex and the productivity is lower. So a lot of times people go for a sort of mixed process, right? So in that regard, I don't need to explain this any further. It's a compromise. That's what it is. So regardless of which process arrangement you use, the 40-minute task with a cycle time of 10 minutes will be accomplished. So now, let's look at the balancing loss. Once again, it's the example of the input and then output. So in that case, we have a transparent box here, right? So we have the first exercise taking 12 minutes, the second 9, and so on. So now we can divide it into stages. We now choose, because we've got 4 exercises, let's choose to have 4 stages here. That means the balancing loss, we take the activity or exercise, for that matter, that takes up the most amount of time, and then we essentially, stage by stage, subtract the time it takes for that specific exercise. So in that case, you can calculate that yourself. I did it in advance, obviously. This is what we get. And we get this number. What does that number represent? Well, it essentially represents 16.7% of balancing loss. Okay, and I'm not saying that a lot of you guys haven't done these things inherently because you are smart people, right? But now that gives you the tools to actually theorize that and actually maybe also look back at what you did in the past and then double check if that actually matches what you essentially thought was right in the first place. So now, the second option here would be 3 stages, just for that example, right? If we go for 3 stages, we know that the longest stage would be 9 minutes plus 8 minutes, so exercises 2 and 3. So now we need to obviously subtract the other numbers from that higher number, which in that case is 17. We get this. So the number 11, by the way, is obviously the added numbers of 17 minus 12 and 17 minus 11. We divide that by the number of stages multiplied by the minutes it takes for the longest stage. Here we get this number, essentially a balance loss or balancing loss, excuse me, of 21.6%. So there you can see only by changing the number of stages we use, we already have completely different numbers. Right, so that's something, a concept that I really want you to think about, because we're going to use this later in my real life example when we apply these theories. Now, the step 4 is to decide or to define which process layout we use. So one thing is important if we look at this, and I'm going to go into concrete examples after that. We've got 4 essential process layout variations, right? Number 1 is the fixed position layout. Fixed position layout, as the graph shows, essentially means that there's one, let's say it's an airport, right? And all the resources come to that specific fixed position, right? So no, the actual manufactured unit, if you will, is not going anywhere. It's not forwarded through a line or something. Everything is coming to that place. That's fixed position. Functional essentially means that everything is divided into functional areas, right? Then a cell is a little bit different. It essentially works as one separate entity, each of them. And then the last one is the product layout, which essentially is a line, right? Think of a car manufacturing, right? So as you can see up on top, that goes from variety and volume. So the more volume you have, the more convenient or the more appropriate would it be to get a product layout, for example. So if the volume of people is high, right? So let's say you have to serve 200 people within 1 hour, then most likely you should look into a product layout, for example. And on the opposing side, it means that there's not much variety, right? Because in order to have a line, every unit needs to be the same or needs to be treated in the same way. Right? I hope that makes sense. So let's look at this a little more closely with some examples, right? We have those 4 layouts as discussed in the slide earlier. And from our perspective, that would be a professional service. So professional service usually goes from fixed to functional. Then we have a so-called service shop, which usually falls into the spectrum of functional and cell layout. And then at the very end, we have a mass service. Okay, so here's a little bit of an idea that I want to give you regarding how this spectrum comes to life, right? Once from a process task perspective, but also from a process flow perspective. And now here's a few examples. If you think about a professional service in our environment, well, that's, for example, Cristiano Ronaldo, right? Having 5 people serving him. It's obviously a fixed position layout because he's on the treatment table and there's 5 people just storming essentially to help him with whatever he wants, I suppose, because there's a hand everywhere. I don't want to go into details here because it's like a group activation, right? And last but not least, we have the product layout, which is a big box gym. So now let's apply all of these theories to give a little bit more of an idea how I use this over here, or how we use this over here to enhance our environment for the players. So a secret step that I didn't mention was to actually map our space, right? So we have 2 rooms. One is 6 by 10 meters, the other one is 5 by 6 meters. So very small, if you will. On the other hand, it's also, there is no real layout, as you can see, okay? So it makes it hard to actually get a certain flow into this whole gym environment there at all. So putting this into context, I'm gonna go back to that later because obviously it becomes important when I show you how we change this. So this is our transparent box. Okay, I take now the example of our lower body strength training. And these are the different allocated times. So it's very important, and I can really encourage you to do that, to actually time what it takes you or what it takes your players on average to do those exercises. Because only that way you can really be sure how much time you need to allocate or how much you need to change, if at all, obviously, need to change your process. The first one, which is something I also encourage you not to forget, is actually demoing and queuing of the exercises, right? Don't forget about these things. There's something that is called service blueprinting. You may want to write that down if you want to. So, which essentially helps you to define all the different steps as well from a service perspective, because there's things that are visible to the customer, in that case, the player, right? But there's also lots of things going on in preparation. As you guys know, you need to set up the gym, for example, but also on the back end, think about an AMS, right? Where all the stuff goes into. So yeah, look at this maybe on a different day if you want to. Service blueprinting is the keyword here. So now, taking all those numbers that I had to deal with here, like we have an allocated time of 75 minutes for that session, right? We have 21 field players that we need to take care of in those 75 minutes. And all in all, I just go back again, it's the 32 minutes it takes us in total to go through it. So the throughput time is 32. Calculated cycle time will be 3.57 minutes, and the process capacity will be 8.97. Now, that tells us that essentially, in order to fulfill the demands of that process, every 3.57 minutes a player needs to finish the session. And 9 players have to be served at the same time in order, once again, to ensure that all of this is done within the time available. Obviously, the 9 comes from the fact that we can't, we only have people that are complete, right? So which is why 8.97 becomes obviously 9 players. Little side note here. But wait a minute. So the first player won't be done until 32 minutes in, right? Because they start at exercise 1, or the demoing, if you will, and then they have to go through. So essentially, we can't say that that it is enough, essentially, to get those 9 players done. So what I'm trying to say here is you need to think a little bit more closely in regards of that, because it's a staging process, right? It is some sort of line layout at the very highest level. So, but we're going to go into the iceberg underneath the sea, obviously, in a second. All right, so once again, coming back here. So that would also mean only 14 players in those 75 minutes. And the other thing that I want you to focus on is the fact that 3.57 minutes is not, if you go back here, in any way fitting into this transparent box. Why? Because we always need to consider the longest activity as our lowest output rate, or like I said, cycle time, right? So why is that so? Because it essentially works, if you want to have an image here, it works as a drum that sets the beat for the rest, right? So if I have 3.57 minutes, it essentially means I can't fulfill an output of, or a cycle time of 3.57 minutes, because 7 minutes is the minimum amount that I have between, or that I can fulfill between 2 players here, right? So that's why I wrote down here that instead of 2, we actually need 3 players, because 2 players would be obviously 3.57 is higher than 7 minutes. So we would have 2 people that we need to serve at the very same time always. So this is the least sequential option we have. But since the very first group of people, or the first 2 people, would not be done after minute 32, we actually need to then add a 3rd player to start at the very beginning to be able to serve the demands here, right? So that means the thinnest layout, or the most sequential, like I said, layout that we can go with is still 3 people at the very same time. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So now the question is, though, is this the most efficient way? And are staff, gym space, and equipment able to serve 18 players at the same time? How do we come to the 18 players? Well, we have a certain amount of stages, right? Sorry. And we need to fulfill double the amount, like I said earlier, in order to fulfill the demands, right? So now, let's look at the balancing loss first and foremost. So the least I can do here is 6 stages, right? Essentially, once again, if each exercise is one station or one stage. That brings me to a balancing loss of 24%. Now, what we did is, and this is a little bit controversial, I get that, and you will find out why. We narrowed it down to 3 stages, but as you can see by the color coding, we also changed the exercise order. And this is something we come then to actually a balancing loss of only 3%. But why is this controversial? Well, because obviously you have your strength philosophies or strength training philosophies, and maybe for you, you think, okay, no, this exercise A needs to come right before exercise B. So kind of like task precedence, if you will. So number 1 has to be done in order to be able to do number 2. No pun intended, by the way. So what we did though is, and that's just based on experience, we changed the order because what players hate, if you look at this, what players hate the most in my experience is wasted time / waiting around, right? So even if that layout or that programming now is not 100% optimal, but now only 90% optimal, I know that I will get more out of my players in that 90% than in those 100%. Mike Boyle, one of my mentors, always used to say the worst or a poor workout done perfectly well always outperforms the perfect workout done poorly. And I strongly believe in that as well, right? Once again, controversial, you might not agree, but this is my opinion. So now let's go to back to the space mapping, right? And back to the process layout. So what did we do essentially? We took our layout or our gym spaces. We took what we calculated here, so the 3 stages, and we took the different options in regards of process layout. By now you should know that only functional and cell are potentially something that we would be looking into because of the nature of the process, right? It's a service shop. So now a functional layout would look like this. So essentially we will have different areas where we can divide everybody into. So now, as you can see, potentially that's not enough to serve 18 players at the same time, right? So then let's look at the cell layout. Again, these are now 100% layout. So this is 100% functional, this is 100% cell. But as you can tell here, it only gives us 8 people to serve at the same time, also less than 18, right? And we even have some free space here, so unused space, if you will. Not to say that free space isn't helpful, but in regards of this specific process, it is essentially a loss. So what did we do then? Well, we chose a mixed layout. So we now have this layout set in place. And if your question is, 18 players, yes, 18 works, because in the small room on the right-hand side, we essentially have 2 people starting at the core and plyo. Then they move on 1 lower from your perspective, right? Then they move on 1 lower, so we get 6 people here at the same time. In the bigger room, we can serve more at the same time, like at one station, so which essentially means 4. They move on from the core and plyo to the lower upper body, lower body, so the big squares, and from that they move on to the kind of like a rectangular upper body, lower body. What is that? This is essentially our unilateral part, right? So whilst we have half recs on the lower side, then the upper side, the smaller ones, that's then where we have our free weights and other benches. Right? So here are the takeaways. I hope that wasn't too fast for all of you guys, but the very first thing you need to do is create a process model. Then you need to identify the process demands and calculate the relationship. Then you define the process stages to minimize balancing loss and define necessary work in process. And then last but not least, you arrange the activities appropriately by using the most suitable process layout. That's it from me. Thank you so much. If you find out more, if you want to get into conversations with me, always happy to do so. Always trying to learn, always trying to pick the brains of way smarter people than I am. So come visit me or text me, write me, whatever. I'm always available and I'm happy to chat. Thank you so much.
Great stuff, Max. Thanks for that. And look, like I said, I suppose there was a hell of a lot of information in there. So Max has his contact details up there. So please don't hesitate to reach out to Max and ask him a question if you weren't able to think of one or submit one now. In practical terms, Max, how do you go about, I suppose, monitoring time and stuff and applying this day to day?
Well, let me see if I get the question right. So your question is like, how do I ensure that everybody moves to the next station on time in order to fulfill the demand?
Yes, yeah. So that's just one that we have in here on our private.
Essentially, I set the timer.
Okay, and
I just move them. I move them along. So it also kind of creates this efficiency because nobody's just faffing around.
And how have you found the players have adapted to this setup then?
Well, like I said, I think if players hate one thing, it's a waste of time. So they actually appreciate the fact that everything is planned out because it gives them the feeling of being treated professionally for once. Like that you can really, because obviously there was a huge question like, oh, we did change that. But also if you think about how our gym looked before, right? It's kind of like, it's a whole mess and players are not stupid. So they also go like, there's never more than 4 people. Now this station is, where should I go? And so on. There is no flow. So I think once we introduced this, it was like the easiest thing for us to do. And now actually the players essentially train themselves after they got the demo and the exercise selection for that specific day. So I think for us, it was a huge benefit on all levels because they're really engaged now, to be fair. And obviously the front office is also very happy because the argument we made also comes to life because when they talk to the players, they go like, no, it's awesome, so yeah.
Okay, great. Max, thank you so much for that presentation. And Max, your presentation, like everybody else's, will be available on YouTube and will be emailed also to anyone who registered. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Okay. So that concludes our presentations for this evening. Thanks again to all our speakers for taking the time to put together your presentation and then of course coming on and actually delivering it. So as I mentioned, they will all be on the STATSports YouTube channel, which you can follow later this week. If it is your first time joining us, the presentation videos from our previous webinar series in 2020 are available publicly to view on our YouTube channel as well. So there's lots of good content there. If you're looking for more content to sink your teeth into, you can check out the research section of our website, statsports.com. So there's a library of articles about GPS application, metrics, goalkeeper monitoring, as well as interviews with practitioners. So you can check that out. And of course, a lot of the presenters had their contact information as well on their slides. So feel free, like the guys said, they're more than happy to talk to anyone who has specific questions about any of the content of today's presentations. I hope you enjoyed the first webinar of the 2021 STATSports webinar series. A special word of thanks also to JP again from FC Utrecht for all the hard work he has put in to ensure the success of this webinar and to make it all tie together. So thank you to JP. Our next webinar will be announced in the coming weeks on our social media channels, and all those registered for today's event will receive that email as well, offering them to register for that one too. If you are a user of the STATSports Apex system and you're interested in presenting some of your work at one of our webinars in the future, please get in touch with your account manager. If you aren't using the STATSports system, you can see there's a request a demo link there, so we'd be more than happy to hear from you and show you some of our system in more detail. Thank you once again for logging on this afternoon and this evening. If you have any feedback for us, you know, please don't hesitate to let us know either. So have a good evening.